The order of these ousters in recent years is also eerily similar to the list of nations cited by retired General Wesley Clark back in 2007.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
An earlier outline of this strategy was promoted with the 2004 publication of the New York Times bestseller, The Pentagon's New Map by Thomas P. M. Barnett.
I say what I do, and I think what this office does, this Office of Force Transformation needs to do, is think about the future of warfare within the context of everything else. And I think the everything else becomes more and more important as we understand this global war on terrorism within the larger context of the spreading of globalization. So here we go.
The book became a bestseller with help from favorable media coverage, including C-SPAN broadcasts of Barnett's brash PowerPoint presentations with audiences full of military, foreign policy wonks. On his new map of the globe, Barnett reveals this global conflict as a struggle between 2 major groups of nations or regions. The bloc that the United States belongs to, as part of North America, mind you, is what Barnett described as the functioning core of globalism. It consists of North America, Europe, Russia, Japan, China, India, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Resisting this globalized power structure is a group of non-integrating gap regions, composed of the Caribbean area, most of Africa, the Balkans, the Caucasus, the Middle East, Central Asia, and the southern corners of Asia. The gap refers to its appearance as a large gap between the areas of the core, stretching around the globe at approximately the mid-latitude regions. A nation or region's integration into the functioning core denotes acceptance of certain core beliefs of globalization, according to Barnett. Barnett's willingness to compromise free human rights in order to advance globalism is evident in his list of allies that includes what he calls the newest pillars of the core: China, Russia, and Mexico, countries with long histories of corruption and human rights violations. An astute review by religious writer David Bay in his current events commentary of March 12, 2011, summed up Barnett's new map with this statement: "Once you understand this reality, that some countries and regions are lagging behind the rest of the world in being incorporated into the global economy and government, and need to be boot-kicked into fully joining the world body, you will understand why we are now at war, and why we will keep on going to war, from the Middle East to the Korean Peninsula, to Indonesia, to Pakistan, to Cuba, to Somalia, Kenya, the Ivory Coast, Saudi Arabia, and to East Timor." Perhaps no regional jurisdiction will be as vast as the one planned for the entire continent of Africa. Currently, the African Union is such in name only. Its aspiration to One Africa will be such a monumental task that the continent has been divided into sub-regions in order to bring it about. Only after these sub-regions of nations are integrated themselves will they then be federated into one continental jurisdiction, with a continental parliament, court system, military, and common currency. Meanwhile, the African sub-regions themselves are moving at varying stages through the 5 stages of regional integration. The East African Community appears to be leading the way, and is on the verge of becoming a federated union of 5 nations. The region had announced that it would establish a common currency soon, but that may be delayed until the regional infrastructure is more firmly established. In Africa, it is Western colonialism that plays the role of the antagonist that spurs continental union. But the irony is that Western nations and financial institutions, ostensibly in competition with China, are the main organizations providing the resources for African integration, under the same globalist loan shark conditions that were described by economic hitman John Perkins.
Remember, it is to prepare for sending in an African intervention force
pour permettre au Mali
to allow Mali to recover its territorial integrity in line with the resolutions of the UN Security Council.
du Conseil de sécurité.
Paris wants to hand over command of the mission as soon as possible to a force promised by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. That force is supposed to receive European Union training, which is expected to take some time.
As with Central Asia and the Middle East, the African Union region-building process is being met with much resistance that will take years to eliminate. And once again, the U.S., along with European Union nations and NATO, has been called upon to provide military support. U.S. military presence thus far has been in an advisory and logistics role, supporting United Nations mandates for the African Union and the sub-regional forces.
Ali Rodríguez, cuenta con este pueblo para tu gestión tan importante al frente de la Unión de Naciones Suramericana, UNASUR.
UNASUR, the Union of South American Nations, is employing the same motive for regional integration as the African Union, namely a defiance of European colonialism and U.S. hegemony in the Southern Hemisphere. The recent UNASUR backing of Argentina's resistance to British control of the Falkland Islands, off the Argentine coast, is a case in point. But like the African Union, UNASUR still needs investment from their designated antagonists and their loan shark international bankers to achieve their goal. Hence, reaction to integration efforts in South America has brought a mix of encouragement and interference from international financiers and world leaders as they work to steer South American integration into cooperation with a global network. The leading voices in the South American integration movement, all outspoken socialists, have been stricken with illness in recent years. Nestor Kirchner, one-time president of Argentina, then became president of UNASUR before he succumbed to cancer. Brazil's populist president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, left office also with cancer at the end of 2010, but his improved health has generated talk that he could become UNASUR president in 2013. But the most bombastic UNASUR advocate was Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, who died of cancer in March. The next generation of South American leaders will oversee UNASUR's absorption of a handful of sub-regional organizations, including Mercosur, Southern Common Market, ALBA, Bolivarian Alliance for Peoples of Our America, CAN, Andean Community, and perhaps even CARICOM, Caribbean Community. Mercosur has been performing South American trade functions apart from UNASUR's political emphasis, but is expected to be brought under the UNASUR umbrella in the near future.